Hey everyone, I wanted to hop on today to talk about a part of breakup recovery when you're recovering from a breakup with an avoidant attacher. One of the common challenges I've seen for a lot of my clients over the last month and bit has been struggling with a lot of beliefs like, if they did this to me, then it means they never really loved me. They must have done this because they think that I'm a bad person. The only reason they would ever do this to me is because they never really loved me at all. And we've seen, me and my clients, that a lot of the resistance to accepting the breakup is also to do with a very overactive ego that frankly needs to calm the hell down. And today I'm going to talk about some insights that I often share with my clients about how to calm our ego down and also to find ways to work through this, because I think this will help for those of you that are actually still working through this. And I also want to take a minute here too to state the reason I call it ego death, which is very Eckhart Tolle language, is because I do think that going through a significant breakup like this does cause our ego to go through a pretty big bruising to the point where we fundamentally change our self-concept. So that's why I just want to declare that I've been very intentional with my language here. And I'll talk in a minute about my definition of what the ego means, why it's important to understanding this for breakup recovery, and so on. Ground rules as follows. As always, you have any questions for me about this topic or anything I talk about in general, feel free to put it in the question mark box below. Other than that, let's dive straight in. When we think of the ego, generally speaking, we usually think of it, I think, as like someone who's haughty, someone who's like high and mighty and on their horse, and is someone who's just being very, maybe a bit arrogant. And we describe it as someone who's maybe being very overbearing, right? That's maybe the layman's way of looking at ego. I look at ego less as someone who's stereotypically on their high horse and more as the way in which we view ourselves in relation to other people. It's sort of the way in which we hope that people will look at us and how we want to be perceived. And one of the many roles of the ego in our development is to help us avoid unnecessary shame, embarrassment, and humiliation. And a breakup with an avoidant attacher can induce all of those things, because often it can make us feel like we're not good enough, we're a bad person, we aren't being chosen, we're being rejected, and as though we didn't get a say in this. And this can cause us to come up with a lot of very adolescent beliefs about what this means about us, and it can be to our detriment in terms of the recovery journey. So today, I want to talk what it's like for a lot of people who are more anxious, secure, and maybe fearful avoidant as they're trying to work through a breakup recovery, because often I find that the way we view ourselves in relation to the person who broke up with us can frankly shoot ourselves in the foot. And so it's my hope that this starts to help people move through a stage of just not accepting the situation. Let's start there. One of the big challenges I often see for a lot of my clients is just not accepting the fact that it's over, that this relationship with your partner is done and dusted, which I get. I know a lot of people are clinging on to hope, and that's a conversation for another day. But I think a lot of people also don't want to admit it because they feel so defeated, humiliated, and ashamed of this relationship or even situationship ending the way that it did, which I get. I respect the fact that for so many people, the way in which these avoidant attachers just blindside people, discard people, leave people is not only traumatic, but also very humiliating, because it can make you feel like this is the sort of treatment given to someone who's not even worthy of a conversation. It kind of can make you feel like, well, you must be a bad person if this person's treating you this way, right? Which is not entirely accurate. The thing is that many people understandably grapple with the fact that this story has come to an end, at least for now, and it may not continue ever again. I find that a lot of people want to try and change their avoidant partner. They're still trying to cling on to any vestiges of the relationship to try and make it work, to bring it back to life. And I think they also do it not only from a place of desire to reconnect with their partner, but because they cannot admit to themselves that there is failure in this relationship and that it's simply just never going to get off the ground ever again. And this is where it can become problematic, as I see a lot of clients struggling to accept this because for them, they think it means something about themselves. They internalize this and say, okay, if I accept that this is over, what does it mean about me? Maybe it means that I'm a failure, I'm a reject, no one's going to love me. Where am I going to find love like that again? It means something but terrible about myself. And part of the way to overcome this is to start to challenge this and realize this breakup actually may not mean anything about you. Sure, you could look at it as maybe it's an incompatibility issue, for sure. But at the end of the day, this person who's chosen to end this situationship or relationship has done so for their own reasons, rational or otherwise. And just because this person has broken up the relationship doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean this was a failure. It doesn't mean anything. It just means it's over. At least this chapter of it is. Maybe it means the entire book's over. But it doesn't mean anything about you. And I think for so many people, they struggle with the idea of having to communicate to friends and family describing what happened. Because if you present the details as they are, a lot of well-intentioned friends and family simply do not understand the complexities of this dynamic. They often feel added shame, feeling like, ugh, now I feel like, maybe this was a case that this person never loved me at all. Maybe this was a case that I was delusional. And I find that for a lot of our egos, we desperately don't want to admit that because it's a pretty painful reality to sit with and realize maybe there's something wrong with us. To which I'm here to say, I don't think so in majority of cases that anyone's delusional. However, the problem is that because of the nature of how these avoidant attachers often make it look like they're in the right, you're in the wrong, it can basically make it, their projection onto you can make you feel like you're the cause for this breakup. So, the challenge here for a lot of people is to recognize the fact that just because this person, this avoidant attacher, has ended this situationship in a horrific way, just because they've projected all of their shame and anxiety onto you and made it seem like you're the reason for their departure, I'm here to tell you that that is not accurate. Do not own their shame and their low self-worth and internalize that, making you believe that this is your stuff, because it's not. Much of the time, these folk have broken up with you out of their own shame, anxiety, and low self-worth, and it had nothing to do with you. And just because it's over doesn't mean you're doomed to never find a positive relationship or you'll never find someone else again. It's learning. The more you can look at this experience and realize, I've realized the kind of experiences I want to have with a partner going forward, both good and not so great, you will feel better about yourself in the future. Because if you keep internalizing this and thinking this is a reflection of yourself, you are going to stall your breakup recovery immeasurably. I also find another part that ties into this too is this belief that if I don't forget this, if I'm not fighting for it, then who will? They'll forget about me. They won't remember me. If I'm not fighting for this, if I'm not working for this situationship or relationship, then it means that this never mattered to them. It never mattered to me. It's just, it's only going to be in my head. And then who's going to remember what we had together? And I'm here to tell you, just to be very gentle, that nobody forgets anybody. Sure, avoidant attachers can be very selective of their memory around certain topics that bring up shame, but the reality is that this fight is over. It's done and dusted. There is nothing more to work towards. Somebody has left the situationship and relationship. And as I've said many times, avoidant attachers, infamously, will not fight for a relationship, depending on how severe they are, I should say. So if you are attempting to do a school project, a university assignment, that's a group task, with someone who's decided to leave and not show up on the examination day, why are you internalizing and trying to fight for a project where your partner has intentionally chosen to leave and not show up for that crucial day where you're having your assessment? Not helpful. We have to remember too that in a relationship, it's not just between you and the partner. You're both creating something together. If your partner decides to walk out and isn't willing to contribute to the group project that is your relationship, you can't expect the absent partner to fight for that when they've already gone. You also have to accept the fact too that you cannot feed a plant, do a project that's group-based without the rest of the group. You could try, but it's going to be a sinking ship and you're going to feel as though you're putting in all this effort and not getting anything in return, which is totally unfair. Now, that's an emotion that you should definitely look into because the unfairness of this situation is much better. So I think that it's really important that you focus on that. Putting that to one side for a minute, I want to also focus on another thing that I find a lot of anxious attachers do, and this is also wrapped up in the ego belief of, if I do more, if I do all of this, then the other person will surely reciprocate. If I do ABC, I should get XYZ in return. If I do this, it means that this person loves me. If they're sleeping with me, it means they like me. If they're going on these really lovely dates with me and tell me how amazing the connection is, it means that they love me. And it's like, that doesn't really mean much. Even if the avoidant attacher says to you they love you, sure, accept that for what it is. It does likely mean they love you. But does it mean they will stand the test of time and overcome their fear of intimacy and commitment? Probably not, unless they're willing to actually work on that. Please understand that for a lot of us, I think we believe that we'll be different, we'll be special, and this is a huge ego thing that a lot of us have, which is this belief of, oh, well, if I fight for this, I can prove myself to this person and that I can somehow change the outcome. I can change this. And so I just want to state here in this particular context that you're not going to be able to change the avoidant attachment out of the avoidant attacher. In fact, you continuing to fight for this is going to do the complete opposite for them. So please bear in mind that operating from that belief that you'll be different, that you can somehow change and also maintain this soulmate twin flame situationship or relationship isn't going to work out for the checked out avoidant attacher. So please be careful of a lot of those beliefs that you might have, that if you do more, you should be able to get something in return, because not every human being operates under the same expectations, assumption, and belief systems as you do. I've had to erase a lot of that for myself because I was like, oh, that's dumb. Some of us are natural givers. Some of us find that we're actually just inclined to be very generous with what we do, and that's totally fine. But please bear in mind that just because someone has a disposition to be giving doesn't mean everyone else does. And for givers, if you're on that side of the spectrum where you tend to overgive, your big challenge is learning to have more boundaries around who you give your love and attention to, because not everyone deserves it. You've got to remember that certain people are worthy of a lot of that time and attention, and other people, frankly, will not reciprocate. So you've got to bear that in mind. Now, just pulling up some of the other things that I wanted to bring up for this topic today, I want to go to another major thing which I see a lot with people is black and white thinking. Frankly, this is something that I see a lot with people in this breakup recovery process, where they have a lot of all or nothing sort of thinking, where they might have moments where they'll say things like, well, if I accept this is over, then it means something about me in this relationship. That, if they did this, it means I'm a bad person, that they must have been good and seen something inside of me that was clearly not good for them. That they left me means they just didn't want what I had, and so they left. And it's like, no, not at all. It's not that simple. Black and white thinking is a real detriment to most people in this space. I know it sometimes can act as a bit of a band-aid. Villainize your ex, use a pithy statement to try and help your brain rationalize what happened. But the problem is it doesn't usually explain the complexity of the situation, and may mean that you end up looking at this from the perspective of someone who is feeling like a victim or someone who needs to get on your high heels and be a bit of a villain over the person who hurt you. And that's not necessarily going to help you. I see so many people who just jump the gun and be like, they're a jerk, they're an asshole, they're a narcissist. And it's true. They could have all of those traits, even have full-blown NPD. But if you attack this exclusively from the perspective of, I am the one who is clearly in the wrong here, I'm exclusively wrong, and this person did this clearly because they saw something in me that was wrong, you are going to internalize and hold on to that for a very long time, and it's not helpful for you in the slightest. Just as it's not helpful to exclusively look at them as a narcissist, if that's not true. It's much better to look at the lines of grey and be like, okay, what's the evidence in this breakup? What's the context here? Did this person break up with you because they mentioned many times that they weren't able to build a relationship with you, and they discussed it and then was like, look, I think we've got some incompatibilities. I think there's some issues in terms of how we communicate that we're just not reconciling. We're choosing to call it quits. Or did they leave you without giving a worthy explanation as to why they're leaving you, with one of their many rationalizations like, we just see the world differently. If I'm feeling this way, clearly we're not meant to be together. I think that I love you, but I don't love you. I want spark. You have spark, but I want different kind of spark. If they're saying that, then that isn't helpful. It's not helpful to look at this as if to say everything they said was gospel true. It's like, well, no, these individuals are coming from a place of anxiety. People who are feeling emotionally dysregulated, who are extremely anxious or also angry, don't usually make the wisest of conclusions about a lot of things. So bear in mind that equally, if you are coming from this from a place of anxiety and also fear about how you look, you're probably going to start making some whack conclusions like, I just concluded they weren't into me. It's as simple as that. They're clearly just looking for someone else. It's like, well, no, it's not a case that they weren't into you. It's a case that, for a period of time, they were into you until they freaked the fuck out due to a fear of intimacy. What part of that is difficult to discern? So bear in mind, obviously, that's not going to be everyone. There will be genuine cases of someone who's not into you. And that's a video for another time, but I just want to give people a bit of, reassurance. Someone who's not into you is highly unlikely to start love bombing you, future faking, having a lot of enthusiasm for dates, being into you, texting you all the time, and trying to also push forward a situationship, a relationship, kids, marriage, whatever. Someone who's not into you, frankly, is not going to even bother going to those steps because it's just not something that they even want to remotely consider because they're like, this isn't for me. So please bear in mind, there is a big delineation between those that are genuinely not romantically invested and those that are and have a freak out moment from a fear of intimacy. I think that it's really important for a lot of people to understand that our brains can do a big number of disservices to us in terms of this recovery process, where it can start to also take on a lot of beliefs from people that we may have hung around with at school, friends, family, who make really, frankly, stupid statements about the state of relationships, where they'll say things like, well, I would only behave that way if I truly didn't like someone. I would only say that because I wanted to let you down gently. I would only do what that person did because it clearly means that I'm just not that into you. And it's like, can you stop using people as a metric board of advice if they themselves have not had a good history of relationships as well too? So many people don't even know how to create functional relationships. I wouldn't use everyone as a sounding board to get your advice for why a relationship has turned out the way that it has. So that's another thing to think about too. This is another one that I think is important that's tied to ego, which is fear of failure. That fear of fearing that, this experience, means that there's something wrong with you and how something has turned out. And I want to say, and this is something that a lot of avoidants also struggle with as well too, which is this idea of the shame of something ending and it not working out the way that it's supposed to. For a lot of people with insecure attachment, they dread being betrayed, left, abandoned, and for very valid reasons. But they often internalize it and think, this is something that's, something about me. And with regards to this, I just want to make a point here that it's easier to look at failure as painful experience and learning. It's really important to understand that if you go through a breakup, it doesn't mean that there's something inherently wrong with you. Often I find that a lot of difficult experiences where I've seen a lot of clients who stick it out in challenging relationships to then realize it's not for them is part of their learning. Those of us on the outside looking in can often see the forest from the trees. But one of the best things people can do is actually learn that for themselves when they're in the thick of the shit. And when they've got proper counseling and supervision helping them, or therapy, work through the forest and actually realize for themselves and make decisions on their own and be like, oh, now I recognize what I'm dealing with. That actually helps them so much to figure out more about what's working for them versus what's not. And so many people I see get it twisted where they think, oh, I just never want to have a breakup. I never want someone to leave me. I'm so worried about people, betraying me. And I get it. Betrayal trauma is real and it's happened for a lot of people. But the reality is you cannot control the other person. You can never control another person in dating. You can never control what the other individual is going to do. What you can do is control how you show up, how you process this. And frankly, when you get to a stage of realizing that another person's reaction is entirely coming from their side, well, a lot of the time it's coming from their side, it will help you. But if you are coming at this from a place of just feeling like, oh, well, I have to be hyper vigilant and on guard for everything and just control the outcome by way of being scared all the time, probably not going to be helpful to you in this particular dynamic at all. Circling to another thing that I've noticed for a lot of clients is also a real reluctance to feel your feelings off the back of this. I see so many anxious attachers particularly who are very high functioning and also very high achievers who will tell me things like, oh, well, I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to be doing. Like I'm going out and I'm journaling all the time. I'm trying to get on with my life. I'm trying to do this and I'm not noticing any change and I'm just not feeling any differently. And it's like, whoa. Like, I love your enthusiasm and being high functioning is great, but slow the hell down. It's really interesting seeing a lot of people who approach this breakup from a place of like, well, if I should do all these things, I should magically feel better. It's like, you need to also honor the emotional side of things because it's so hard at times to just accept a lot of those really painful emotions. I see a lot of people, particularly anxious attachers, who've got a big ego around this idea of like, I don't want to show off any sign of weakness. I want to come across as being strong, not looking vulnerable, not looking needy and weak and pathetic. I think it's so important for a lot of people to learn. You can have parts of yourself that are just vulnerable, soft, fragile, and sensitive. You're not made of marble, iron, steel. You are vulnerable to emotional experiences. It's so important to remember that when you're going through this, you have been hurt. You are allowed to accept the fact that you have been devastated by someone's behavior. You have every right to feel that pain. What I often find a lot of people who are big in their ego is they don't want to feel that. So they try and do a lot of high functioning things like double down in work, not want to focus on this to avoid the pain. And maybe that'll help them for a time, but you need to feel that ouch. If you don't, some of the rationalizations that can come up include things like, well, I don't want to acknowledge this because I don't want to let it get to me. I don't want to look weak. I don't want to look pathetic. I also don't want to admit that my partner had an impact on me. If you fail to do that, you're failing to acknowledge that they did have an impact on you, that they did hurt you. And if you don't acknowledge that they hurt you in the first place, you're not going to get to that next stage of being angry and being like, fuck you for behaving in this particular way. It's really important to also acknowledge too that if you're excessively crying and also having big episodes where you are feeling very emotional about this, it may be a sign of some other things that are coming up for you that might be trauma related from your past or other circumstances that might be contributing. I'm gonna take a pause here. Guys, I'm just gonna turn my light up a little bit because I look like I'm in a cave, so bear with me just for one hot second. Thanks, guys. So I think it's really important to understand that I understand that a lot of people who've had bad experiences growing up, whether it be from family or school, have tried to be impervious and show that they don't really give a lot of weight. They have a bit of a poker face. They don't want to necessarily, lay their cards on their sleeve or, wear their heart on their sleeve for understandable reasons. However, it's to your detriment in recovery because you have to understand something really important here, which is, your ego, your way of defending yourself. Yes, there are kookaburras here. Just for a bit of fun context, about this time every night, and usually I'm with a client, there are kookaburras that are usually singing in the background. And there's usually a client who's understandably quite distressed. And I have to pause and be like, I'm sorry, guys, the kookaburras aren't laughing at you. They're just in the background because it's going to night and they always do this. I got a nest right outside my tree. Right outside my apartment. That's so funny. Sorry about that, guys. Anyways, one of the things that I was trying to get at is everyone's ego, to a degree, may have helped them survive very difficult experiences growing up. A lot of people have, developed an ego of, wanting to be very emotionally aloof, trying to look impervious, trying to be very poker-faced. But the problem with this is that in the long run, it doesn't really serve you. A lot of these breakups destroy our egos because it is a way of helping us to actually connect with a lot of our internal fragility and also our internal pain. And so if you don't start to access a lot of the mistreatment that you've had and also how this has made you feel, you can continue to enable this and act like, well, everyone's just doing the best that they can, so I should just, let it be. As someone says here, the body always keeps a score, be kind to yourself. I completely agree. And this is where people are very interesting in that it's really interesting seeing a lot of anxious attachers who are resistant to kindness and also to being soft, squeam, because they aren't used to sort of accepting the fact that it's okay. You can be a bit more rounded and not so prickly and edgy. And it's a really interesting transformation period for a lot of them where they then start to realize, oh, I can start accepting help from other people. I can start expressing the fact that I'm not doing okay. I can finally realize that I'm not doing as well as I normally do. And so it can become a very transformative period for a lot of anxious attachers to finally lay down their armor and recognize, yes, you can accept help. You're lovable. You actually have some great worth and intrinsic value, and you don't have to constantly be a hedgehog to the rest of the world around you. So in that sense, it's really important for many people to re-examine, why is your ego here in the first place? Why are you trying to protect yourself in this particular way? And generally speaking, figure out better ways to appreciate yourself and also to feel like you can actually be more like yourself without needing to wear unnecessary psychological armor from the world at large. Now, moving on to another part of this as well. I think another interesting ego thing that often comes up for a lot of people is this desire for revenge. I see a lot of people who get into a bit of a froth off the back of the breakup and understandably are angry, but take it almost one step too far where they feel the need to punish their ex in such a way for the treatment that they've had. I want to validate and say, to my knowledge, there's no formal justice system that many of us have to protect us from these experiences and these breakups. I wish there was, but there's not. There's no UFO that goes around and picks up these emotionally unavailable people and puts them straight into therapy just yet. But the reality is that a lot of people take betrayal and abandonment very, very hard. And I think it's one of those things where we often see some people, they decide to do some really, really violent things to their ex as a way of trying to get revenge by feeling like they're able to one-up their ex. And a lot of this does come from a place of wanting to not feel like a loser, not wanting to feel like they were a victim in this, by not wanting to feel like they were somehow lesser than. And the issue with this is that it can get you into a lot of trouble legally speaking, and also put you in a place where you then enter into a bit of a shame cycle, where if you do decide to enact revenge on someone, you may end up then feeling a lot of shame and guilt for your action, which then goes on top of a pile that's already very intense in the first place. So bear in mind that whilst I know a lot of people are seeking justice and also wanting some form of retribution for what they've been through, I have found that a lot of people who've tried being their own arbiter for justice don't usually end up having the best results. And in fact, it can make things even worse in the long run. And it just becomes almost a form of self-harm because they're continuing to add a lot of emotional shame to their bucket and also drag out an unnecessary situationship with someone where they've made a decision against you. There are far healthier forms of revenge. Life is usually one of those. You do not need to be in control of how your partner faces their karma. Often these people will go through a stage of, having to inevitably face the music at some point or another, but I don't believe that we necessarily need to be the ones who go out and do that. I appreciate everyone else might have a different stance on that, but it is something that can just get in the way of your recovery, and you're better off just accepting the fact that it's just like, okay, I lost the fight, it's over, it's done. I can accept the fact that it didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. It is what it is, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a loser. It doesn't mean that I'm unlovable. It doesn't mean that I'm somehow unworthy because this avoidant partner chose not to be with me for one reason or another. The less we prescribe harmful meaning to us, the easier it is to then move beyond this and get to a place where it allows us to feel more at peace with the overall experience. I'm just going to round it here just quickly just to double check to make sure that I haven't missed any of the key points that I wanted to talk about as well. No, I think that's about it. I think the last thing I'll say is I appreciate the fact that a breakup like this is traumatic. And I appreciate the fact that for a lot of people, they're not expecting this experience to blow them the way that it does. And I want to make it clear that it's really important to understand that if you look at it months or years after the fact, you will be very grateful for how much this has often actually changed you for the better. And it also does challenge your core beliefs about yourself, as well as how you view yourself in relation to other people. It's my hope that a lot of people start to, like I said, take down their psychological armor and not feel so guarded, to feel less prickly, to actually stop berating themselves with black and white thinking, and to also recognize that these experiences we have with avoidant attachers, as painful and brutal as they are, can often be a lot of learning in the direction of something more sustainable, something healthier, and something more fulfilling down the line. Just because this partner may not be able to facilitate the kind of experience that you want, doesn't mean you will never be able to have a healthy relationship. But the more you get stuck on this one person and hold on to this experience for and ever and amen, you might as well just be sitting in the fridge, emotionally speaking, and not learning how to thaw out and process a lot of stuff. So I suggest that you take time to really work on yourself and internally work through a lot of that intense feeling that you have, because it will really help you out in the long run. All right, I'm going to roll now into Q&A. If you have any questions for me, as always, feel free to put them into the question mark box below. And then once I'm done with those, I'll see if there's any other questions in the chat, but let's get straight into it. Let's see. I know he loved me. I am just sad at the idea that after the detachment, he lost all fondness even for our memories. Actually, he was more involved, so no clue. Generally, in my experience, avoidant attachers often, they do remember a lot of this stuff, but a lot of them also have issues with splitting. So splitting is a term that we use to describe black and white, all or nothing thinking, where 1 minute you can look like a god and then the next you're Satan. And the issue with a lot of avoidant attachers when it comes to how they reflect back on a relationship is that they may at times see you in those all or nothing black and white, good or bad, without seeing the gray. And a lot of this comes from emotional dysregulation. So I appreciate that many people often worry and wonder, did this person ever love me? Did they ever really care about me? And again, that's a bit of an ego thing that a lot of people need to work through, and I've had to go through my own journey of that. But it's really important to understand that for these individuals, they will remember you in ways that, are involuntary to them based on how they're feeling in the moment. Sometimes, they're in a bad mood and they'll think you're the devil. Other times they're just in a really dark place and they're looking to turn to anyone who actually makes them feel good about themselves, and you're it. And suddenly they feel such fondness for you where they just forget about all the difficult moments that you may or may not have had. So in that regard, I'd say just be mindful that the way this plays out for them is both involuntary and not in your control. So just putting it out there as that. I can see someone's actually asked a really interesting question, which is, how does neurodivergence usually play out in attachments? Short answer is I don't know. The reason I'm saying this is because I'm still researching this. I can give you some of my thoughts and ideas around this that I've floated with a lot of clinicians who also work with a lot of people with big attachment issues. The summary of the findings is as follows. We know that being on the spectrum, having ADHD, autism, OCD, whatever you're experiencing is something in addition to an attachment issue. We've seen that a lot of people who may present with avoidant attachment might be more likely to have neurodivergence. And people, the same is true for anxious attachers, but there does seem to be a lot of research papers that suggest people who are more avoidantly attached, particularly dismissive avoidance, might be autistic. But in saying that, the challenge is that that's an additional extra. It's, from what we know thus far, it's not the root of a lot of these issues interpersonally. Meaning that you could have ADHD, autism, OCD, and it adds extra layers to the relational stuff. But when it comes to fear of intimacy, that's usually not something that we believe is hardcore of, autistic, ADHD, OCD. That appears to be completely separate from that. Whilst it's true, people who have neurodivergence might also have, there's a term for this and I've completely forgotten it, rejection sensitivity, I think is the term, heightened rejection sensitivity. Usually that, again, isn't the same sort of stuff we would see in the anxious avoidance style dynamic. So from what I know and from what I've seen with the research, I would say for now, my best answer is it's still a big fat question mark, but we are at the moment, between colleagues and I, looking at this going, it looks like it's something that's an additional extra. It's not the root cause of the issue. Because I know so many people who are anxiously attached who are also autistic or have ADHD who do not behave the same way as someone who has avoidant attachment. And that's been also corroborated with other clinicians who I've spoken to where they're like, oh no, this is not the same as someone who has all these other things going on as well too. But it's a relevant question because I myself was wondering that a while ago and I was like, is this just a neurodivergence related thing? But upon reflection, I'm like, no, I don't think it is. Like the more I've looked into this, I'm like, no, it's not the same. So that's my conclusion thus far. My ex wanted no contact, overwhelmed, I didn't respond, and I unfollowed across all social media. Now they show up at the gym every day. Why do they do this if they wanted it to end? Never willing to go to the gym before. So I'm assuming you dated someone who's probably a fearful avoidant, because what they're doing is they're trying to control the intensity of the intimacy between you and them. So what they're doing is they are trying to manage how much they're feeling for you right now. And so what they've done is they've backed away from you, and now they might be For one reason or another, they're at the gym, and this can be for a number of reasons. One, they are vicariously living out, what they wanted to do in a relationship with you, even if they initially said no. Like, I don't know, like I'm sure many people here would resonate with what I call the deja vu relationship. And I talked about this ages ago, which is this idea of when you have an avoidant attacher who you dated, say you were planning holidays together, or they were disagreeing about the kind of experiences they wanted to have with you, and then you see them jump into a new relationship where they're doing all said things that they either were agreeing to do with you or not agreeing to do with you. Often it's their way of playing out a lot of their guilt and shame for not doing that with you. They could be just going to the gym now because it's their way of feeling more, space from the intensity of the emotion around you. Could be for a variety of reasons. But you've got to understand that someone with avoidant attachment, particularly when it's severe, their objective is to manage intense emotions between them and the person they're with around intimacy. So when they're feeling closer to someone, they want to try and find ways to push it away because it freaks the hell out of them. There are other things that are attached to that as well, but that's my best way of describing what I think is happening here. Why is my avoidant ex texting me and wanting to talk about the things that went wrong, but then says he still needs space? I had to tell him to stop texting because it's confusing and hurtful. I can't move on and I don't want him to use me as an emotional crutch to move on. Okay, this is very similar to my answer for the previous one, which is, in this particular example, it sounds like they're trying to dictate not only the distance, but also the narrative. You see, them telling you all the things that went wrong is not for your benefit. They're doing it for them. They're trying to rationalize in their head why this wasn't working, so they feel less guilty and shameful for what they're doing. And in this particular instance, they're texting with you in order to feel better about themselves. They're not texting because they're necessarily trying to work on the relationship. And again, this is about trying to manage that intensity of the emotions between them and you. So they're texting you, doing it all on their terms. You got to remember too, it goes back to that keyword of control. People who have a severe avoidant attachment style can be masters of subtle control. And unlike anxious attachers who are much more overt in their control, these people are all about managing that intensity, the intimacy between them and the person that they're with. So it's very selfish behavior. Why does it still make me angry that my avoidant ex doesn't even say hello if I see him at the gym? Gosh, we've got a lot of gym goers around here from the avoidant partners. Like we were years together and now he doesn't even say hello. How ridiculous is that? But still so obvious. Why does it still manage to trigger me? A conversation between you and a therapist, I would say. But being gentle to you, I'd say, totally get it. Like it's, with all due respect, excuse my French, but it's fucking annoying when you know you've had quality time with someone and now they're acting like a child where they're acting as if you never existed. Like that's just obnoxious, it's rude, it's invalidating, it's not fair. So totally get it. You're well within your right to be pissed off at the way in which, your former partner, who was seemingly with you for years, is now all of a sudden acting like, you're complete strangers. It's not okay to do that. So I just want to make it clear that, when you're experiencing that, on one hand, yes, it's really rude and offensive, but I'd also, like I said cheekily before, I would also introspect and be like, what's this doing for me? Because maybe it's triggering you. It may be both insulting and triggering. And maybe there's something here about this dismissal, betrayal that's bringing up crap from the past that might need to be investigated. So I'd say maybe that's an opportunity to explore and introspect as to what's going on there. What else have we got here? By the way, as always, guys, you ask fabulous questions, so thank you as always. Someone's asked here, is there a word limit on questions we can ask here? Can't go beyond a couple sentences. Okay, I've never heard anyone ask this before. That's great. You can basically just fill that in. So if you limit it to say a couple of sentences, just fill what you can and then maybe just do another one and I'll see if I can put the two together if I see that you've written more than one. People do that all the time, so that's totally fine. The shorter the better. I understand, obviously, Instagram doesn't allow for a lot of nuance at the best of times, but just do what you can for now. That's a great question for structural reasons. He reconnected with his ex while we were going through the breakup. Did he leave me because he still had unresolved feelings for his ex? Yes and no. I suspect his ex became a phantom ex and it became part of his deactivating strategy. The thing is, you got to understand, these individuals don't resolve their feelings for their previous partners or for you until they work through it in therapy. So if they're still holding a candle for a previous person, it's because that emotion was in them already. Just a bit of human knowledge for everyone, psychological info for those of you that aren't aware. Unresolved feelings are unresolved feelings. And they are going to stay stuck in the body until they're finally processed, whenever they get processed, right? So if you've got all these compartmentalization tactics, you've got all these methods for avoiding, your own triggers, your own emotions, your own resentments, your own guilts, shames, love, whatever it may be for someone, that's all going to come out at one point or another. And if you don't have a healthy outlet for that, then it's natural that it's going to surface. So when I hear an example of an avoidant partner who's breaking up with you and simultaneously returning to an ex, it suggests to me that as things were getting intense with you, they were getting into their head over their fears of intimacy and starting to fantasize probably about his ex, remembering all the good times, which are probably real feelings that are coming up for them. And they're running with that and probably now re-engaging with their ex. So that's why I say there's probably a bit of stuff going on here that's quite complicated, but it doesn't mean that he never loved you, they never loved you, they never cared about you, they, always prefer the previous partner over you. It could very well just be a deactivating strategy. And let's see. Oh, wait, now I can see that there's two, I think there's two things here. Is there or is there not? I'm going to keep going here. So he has a girlfriend, but says he is single just to continue having sex with me and have access to me. God, that's terrible. His girlfriend is basically his ex from when he was 15 years old and got back together with her after he met me. What should I do? I feel like shit. Okay, I can't give you advice with that, but the fact that you're feeling like it's shit is tick. Great sign. That's really good. So if it were me, I'd be like, how is this making me feel? It makes me feel like shit. I feel like an option. I feel like I'm totally disrespected. I feel like there's a real lack of commitment and intentionality here. I'd probably be like, does this sit well with me and how I choose to date? Is this in alignment with my values? And how do I want to navigate this? Because I personally think when I hear that, my brain goes, we've got a problem here. Like, that's a serious issue when you're on the back burner like that. And I would really start thinking about a conversation, which I know is scary because it sounds like, look, to be honest, I've been around a few times, so I know how to handle myself in those kind of situations. I would play it differently probably to how you would, but I would seriously start advocating for yourself at that particular point in time. Someone here has asked, what do you mean by ego issue when someone wonders, did they ever love me? Okay, so the reason I call this an ego issue is because it's all about how you see yourself in relation to someone else, right? So you're basically going about this being like, it's that sense of like, I need validation to be like, I need them to prove, like I need proof that they love me, to make it feel like this meant something, this, to validate the experience you had. You don't need that. But it's almost that thing that the ego needs in order to feel satisfied, like, oh, well, I can feel like I'm more of a person or I'm not as crazy as I think that I am. And the reason I think that our ego does that is because in this day and age, I think that we don't want to look like we have egg on our face for these relational, challenges that we go through, as if to say like, well, I don't want to look like, I was delusional in this experience. It doesn't mean you're delusional if they don't ever declare that they loved you. It just means that, maybe this person doesn't have the way of like being able to express love to you. And I think that one of the challenges a lot of people, particularly those that are more anxiously attached, faced is they almost want confirmation that another person loves them by any means necessary. We do need in functional relationships a level of love. Like, that's not a problem. I'm not saying we don't want our partners to declare their affirmations for us. But I think when we come from a place of like needing to know that, I think it comes more from a place of I would feel better about, how I view myself if I had this, rather than accepting the fact like I don't actually need that to know that I'm lovable. Like, that's not relevant. It would be helpful, but it's not essential, is all I'm saying. So I hope that makes sense. All right, what else have we got here? I'm going to do a few more and then I'm going to call it a night because your boy's got some stuff to take care of. Oh, I see here, we got two things. Conflicted about long-term results of ultimatums and law, what's working, versus reasonable dialogue. Stonewalling happening, divorce moving at snail pace, I'm breaking, we're co-parenting. Okay, so I'm assuming that the statement is, I'm conflicted about the results of setting ultimatums with the law versus reasonable dialogue, because at the moment I'm being stonewalled and the divorce I'm going through is moving at a snail's pace. We're breaking apart, we're co-parenting. Okay, my answer to that, okay, so for a bit of context, a while ago I did a video about how to communicate with avoidant attachers. And I said many, many moons ago that if you're engaging with someone who's not responding to healthy communication and you're burning out, this is when you've gotten to a point where you may have to start getting to ultimatum stage, where being like, I can't continue to be in this relationship because this is hurting me and you need to work on this, otherwise I'm out of here, right? So when I'm hearing what this person's saying, which is, I'm unsure as to whether or not reasonable dialogue versus ultimatums, like how it's all working out, like whether it's actually getting results. My answer is every avoidant attacher is different in terms of how they respond to this. At the end of the day, it's not just for them, it's also for yourself. This person sounds to me like they're digging their heels in and probably don't want to face the inevitability of the breakup. There could be some other comorbidities going on too. But I think at the end of the day, you got to remember, you didn't get to ultimatum land overnight. And you also need to bear in mind too that you're likely here because you've tried everything that there is and you're trying to find out how to actually, move forward with this. And it seems like your partner is being very stubborn in terms of making this work. So that's probably what I would say to that. They told me he wants to be with me, just needs time, sees us living together one day, etc. That was in January and haven't heard from them since. Avoidant or ghosting? 50 red roses appeared at the door with no note. Is this him? I don't know if the red roses are from them, but can I just say this is another classic example of what sounds consistent with someone with avoidant attachment, which is this idea of ambivalence, and fearful avoidants do this all the time. It's this thing of like, oh, well, I want you, but I don't want you right now. So if you just wait for me as I work on myself, maybe in the future we can figure this out. Not every fearful avoidant does this, but a lot of the severe ones do. And I find that a lot of them do this because on one hand, they're yearning for the connection, but freaked out that they're not worthy enough to be in the relationship. So in this context, it's definitely not ghosting. I interpret this under the lens of attachment theory. This doesn't sound to me like ghosting. Ghosting would be you never hear from them again, like around the time of the breakup, like they just stop talking to you altogether. Whereas this sounds to me like it was a definitive end and now no contact. It doesn't sound like a ghosting episode. That's how I'm reading it. I could be wrong, but the effect is still brutal because it gives you hope with ambivalence and no indicator of trying to work on this. So it's pretty unfair to you because it doesn't give you any intentionality at all and leaves you with this vague hope of maybe we can figure this out. Spoiler warning, they don't know how to figure this out. They probably have no intention of actually working on it right now because they're probably feeling relief that this is over. So not to be the bearer of bad news, but this is probably it. And I'm only saying that not to be cruel, but just because I've seen this play out enough times now to know that it's just so unfair that their emotional dysregulation is now controlling this dynamic. It's so not okay. Because it sounds like they do really like you, but their fear is in full control right now, and it doesn't sound to me like they're necessarily willing to take those next steps to actually work on themselves, which is not fair. Okay, I'm going to do a couple more and then I'm out of here for the day. Does the dumper feel the same pain as the dumpee when they are the avoidant? No. I learned that a while ago and the answer is no. They will eventually feel the pain of it, but it manifests itself quite differently. The key thing is, it's not the same. So for those of us that are here, and there are many people who come here with like mixed attachment styles. As I always say, it doesn't mean you're anxiously attached if you got dumped by an avoidant. Many of us are in the pits of hell off the back of the breakup, but the avoidant attacher isn't feeling a number of things. They will often feel relief, usually immediately post-breakup. Depending on whether they're fearful or dismissive avoidant, they then usually go through, a cycle where they then feel grief, shame, guilt for what they did. And of course, how they decide to work through that is entirely up to them, and they've got many ways of navigating it. But they don't feel that withdrawal that a lot of us go through, that real heavy oxytocin withdrawal. And they also don't view it the same way a lot of us do, which is feeling like we did something wrong with the relationship. They are usually trying to find ways to overcome the distress of ending things the way they did. And they're trying to combat that intense guilt and shame of how they behaved. But they also can get into heavy denial mode and start rationalizing why they did what they did. So they do feel some degree of remorse, but how they navigate that remorse is usually not sitting with the shit. It's usually trying to find whatever means necessary to avoid it. So just want to say that they usually will go through a bit of a dark period. They're definitely not robotic, but sometimes I find that they can have phases where they feel nothing for the relationship, sometimes for a month, a year, a few years, but then, it can hit them like a truck and they're like, holy shit, what have I done? And they might reach out to an ex years after the fact. So please bear in mind that they do not usually operate conventionally like an anxious or securely attached person would in this context. I can see someone here says, do they need help? Just to be very transparent with those of you that have, who are not fellow clinicians, we're looking at 3 to 5 years max for these people to actually work on their stuff and actually heal. And that's intentional, work on themselves. And one of my colleagues beautifully said, those of us that are more anxiously attached are in what we call active distress because we're feeling all of our emotions. Those that are avoidant have mastered the art of really trying to suppress and compartmentalize their distress. So they think their way of operating is working for them. Many of them are frustrated with those of us that are emotional, thinking, why can't they just get it together and make it work out? But many of us don't compartmentalize our emotions. We're actually working through them in a healthy, productive way. So that's why, they think their way of navigating life works for them. They're often in denial, rationalizing to hell why it works for them without realizing the damage it does to them internally. All right, one more and then your boy's heading out for the night. Is there a way to identify my primary attachment style? Is there a way to identify my primary attachment style, which has always been anxious, or the anxiety, determine whether this was anxious or the anxiety was simply caused by the hot cold treatment of a fearful avoidant discarding? Okay, so basically what we're finding out is how do we identify whether or not I have truly an anxious attachment or it was anxiety induced by this particular dynamic? Great question. I think the biggest clue would be looking at your pattern of how you behave when there's relational stress in close friends, family members, previous partnerships. If your go-to response is to communicate and to try and work through things, and you're pretty decent at managing and navigating conflict, you're probably leaning more secure. But if you're someone who has been traditionally more of someone who people pleases, goes to a fawn response, the people please response, someone who is passive aggressive at times, struggles to set boundaries, you might blur the lines a little bit with the secure behavior and be a bit on the cusp. But I think your biggest metric is not exclusively the relationship you've been in just recently, but the history of a lot of close interpersonal relationships and seeing where everything lies, and maybe even speaking to a specialist about it to look at it objectively, because everyone's a little bit different. All right, everybody, thank you very much for attending my little TED Talk today. As always, I loved it. I hope those of you that joined got some value out of it. And I very much look forward to seeing you guys next time. I saw someone ask me about doing a topic on how to discern the difference between they're just not that into you versus someone with avoidant attachment. I feel like I've done that one a few times, but I can do it again. But I wanted to just say, if any of you have a topic that you are if there is a topic of something like a question that you want to ask me that you think might be worth discussing in a live, feel free to just DM me, or better yet, just as I can see someone's asking, hope this will be saved. Yes, it will. Feel free to just post a comment on this video sharing what you'd like me to talk about. Because if it's a topic I'm interested in discussing, I will just be like, yep, let's do this. One of my favorite ones that I did was actually last week's one, which was about feeling like a crazy ex off the back of a breakup with an avoidant. And it was new, it was refreshing, I really enjoyed it. So if any of you feel inspired by something that you want me to discuss, throw it at me by DM or comment on this video, and I will happily take it into consideration for next week, because I am starting to enjoy doing this on a once a week basis for everyone. And so, yeah, have a wonderful evening, day, morning for those of you that have watched, and I will see you guys next time.